Here I was, my first full day in La Habana. I woke up with the sun and hit the city exploring. If Bear Grylls has taught me anything in life, it's to find a high point in the surrounding area to get your bearings. Pun intended there, by the way. So I did just that. I found myself at the top of one of the famous hotels in Parque Central that had a stunning 360-degree view of the city. Perspective changes everything, and from up top, I really got an idea of how big and beautiful this city really is. On one side I had the Bacardi building that opened in the 1930s and sat on the edge of La Habana Vieja. On the other side, I had El Capitolio, which finished construction in the late 1920s and is the gateway to Central Habana and Chinatown. As the Caribbean sun beat down on me, I did what any other logical, sane person would do in that moment. Drink a mojito. I sat and enjoyed my drink while I looked down the Paseo de Prado and into Central Habana. I've always been a man who enjoys some good people watching, so I stayed perched in my crow's nest and took in all the sights, sounds, smells, and everything that was around me for as far as the eye could see. A steady breeze came in from the ocean, which provided me an escape from the hot Cuban sun. Here in America, as well as other places in the world, we are conditioned to constantly have our heads down looking at our phones, even living through them in some cases. To be completely honest, it was great to unplug from all of that and just be in the moment, letting my thoughts and emotions take over. The 3 mojitos I had helped with that as well. Staring out over the city, looking into the ocean, thinking about life is something I will never forget. I finished up my drink and headed back down to hit the streets below. After getting such a good view of the city and the lay of the land, I had a few places in mind I wanted to explore next. I headed deep into La Habana Vieja to check out Plaza de Armas, the city's oldest plaza that is surrounded by restaurants and hosts numerous second-hand book stands. From there, I ventured to Plaza de San Francisco de Aziz, which is right across from the La Habana harbor and is one of the main squares in the city that dates back to colonial times. Speaking of the harbor, after leaving the plaza, I hopped on a ferry to take me to the other side of the bay to see El Cristo and the view of the city from the hill where the statue sits on. It was about a 10-minute trip from one side of the harbor to the other, which allowed me to get to know my new acquaintance, Arlette. She's a very sweet and knowledgeable girl that was my tour guide for the afternoon. We got off the ferry and started climbing 1,000 stairs to the top. I'm not joking, my legs were on fire the entire way up. I tell you what though, I got my steps in that afternoon, that's for sure. Once we got to the top, I could see all the way back across the city for miles from where I was earlier. Made it to El Cristo sculpture. The locals joke it looks like he's holding a cigar and a drink in his hands, which is pretty spot on if you ask me. Also caught a glimpse of the house where Che Guevara lived for a number of years that was directly across the street. From there we headed back down to the other side of the harbor to enjoy other parts of the city. Speaking of Arlette, here she is.
Hola.
All this walking around had me parched and I needed to get another drink. She had just a place in mind to go, so we made our way to a local joint that made fresh coconut cocktails. Say that 5 times fast. Right off the street, not too far from where we were. We got there and then my man over here did his Jason Voorhees thing to the coconut and then asked if I wanted rum, to which I replied, "Si todo Eldron, por favor y gracias." He hooked it up and then me and Arlette went to go enjoy each other's company in the shade. By the way, if you ever find yourself in La Habana and want someone to show you around, she's your girl. An afternoon spent walking around for miles will really work up an appetite. Before we said our goodbyes, I asked Arlette for a good recommendation for dinner. She mentioned El Chanchuelo, so I took her suggestion and made my way there. I plopped myself down at the bar on the 3rd floor and had the pork. Needless to say, it was phenomenal. All of it. I finished up dinner about 6 o'clock and then did a bit more exploring by myself while I mulled over my options for the evening. All the reading and researching I did planning for this trip mentioned unanimously one thing that must be done while in La Habana. I had seen many people doing it since my arrival on the island, so it was my time to fall in line. I made the journey back to Parque Central where I met up with Jean Manuel and his nephew, Orlando. From there, I jumped in the back of their 1956 Chevy for my very first classic car ride. We drove up and down the city hitting all the spots. Explored Plaza de Revolucion, where numerous events have been hosted including visits from the Pope on different occasions. From there, we rode past the Cementerio de Cristobal Colon, one of the most notable cemeteries in Latin America and is known for its many elaborately sculpted memorials. Made a stop in Parque John Lennon, where there is a life-size statue of him sitting on a bench. Driving through the Vedado neighborhood itself was fascinating. The streets are lined with enormous mansions that used to house the city's most wealthy public figures and politicians, and is now home to some of the best restaurants and nightclubs in the city. Ventured back down to the Malecon to cruise the strip. Passed by the Hotel Nacional de Cuba, which opened its doors in 1930 and sits atop a hill overlooking the ocean. Being one of Cuba's most electric hotels, it served as a venue for an American Mafia gathering back in 1946, which was later depicted in The Godfather Part 2. It's hosted many other notable guests including Nat King Cole, Winston Churchill, Ernest Hemingway, and Frank Sinatra. I would have been one of those people too, but it was a tad bit out of my price range. Some say the Malecon is the world's largest bar. Many locals, tourists, and people from all walks of life make their way down here at sunset to hang out and authentically converse with one another. Couples will share a romantic moment, while strangers will share rum, and before you know it, you've made a new friend. That's my kind of bar. I sat back in my seat of this 1956 pink Chevy and listened to Hernando as he educated me on Cuba's rich, layered history. As I've said before, perspective changes everything. Growing up in America, I heard one side of the story when it comes to Cuban and American relations. Without getting into politics, it was great to hear the other side of the story and their point of view. It's funny, people do disagree often, but I've found people have way more in common with one another than what it may seem sometimes. All it takes is an open mind and good conversation. While talking with Hernando, I got word we were heading towards one of the spots I had been wanting to check out since arriving on the island. It was across the harbor near where I was earlier in the day, but didn't make it quite down that far. Not gonna lie, I'm a fan of forts and La Habana is scattered with them all over the city. One of them being Castillo de los Tres Reyes de Molo. It's a mouthful, I know. So we hit the tunnel that connected the main part of the city to the other side of the harbor and made our way there. The scattered rain showers that tried to plague my convertible classic car ride had since moved on to the west, and the sun started to peek its way through the clouds. We snaked our way back towards the fort after leaving the tunnel as the salty ocean breeze started to relieve what was once a humid afternoon. By now, I was used to constantly sweating, but the wind from the north was more than welcome nonetheless. Jean-Manuel parked the car and I walked up the short hill to overlook the city. I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't have the Pirates of the Caribbean soundtrack playing through my head as I ascended to the top. It's honestly a miracle I didn't try and sword fight a stranger with sticks, but by God I wanted to. With the sun finally setting over the city, Jean-Manuel and Hernando drove me back to the other side of the harbor and let me off at the tip of the Malecon in La Habana Vieja, where I could look back at where I just was. People had already started gathering for the evening, with rum, cigars, and guitars in hand. I found a spot off to the side and sipped on a little rum myself and watched the sun disappear behind the horizon. The gentle waves from the ocean softly lapped just feet below me as I reflected over my day. It was a pretty solid one if I say so myself, but it wasn't over yet. I had my first night ahead of me in La Habana, something that I was very excited about. I took in the sun's final moments of the day and headed back to my Casa Particular to get ready for the evening, which included a pregame cigar. I didn't know exactly where I was going to go, but that was part of the fun. I was anxious to get out and go make some new friends and see where the night took me. It wasn't long before I found myself a Cuban crew, and the night was on.
Pinchalo. This is the best taxi driver of all times, and welcome to the greatest bar hall on earth. See?